Hi there, and welcome to the podcast Life as a show intently focused on exploring and unearthing the details of professions and the people behind them. I'm your host, Christopher Schoenwald. It's so easy to slip into our own individualized worlds, which are undeniably attached to never-ending streams of emotions like happiness, stress, elation, pressures, uncertainty, and so on. And this self-absorption can make it a challenge to find the time to consciously focus on the plight of others. Now, as harsh as that statement is to accept, it's often the truth for many of us. Well, my guest today rarely, and I mean rarely, if ever, has such lapses as far as thinking of the needs of others. And quite frankly, she cannot afford to. Her judgments, assessments, and actions can often have life or death consequences for vulnerable populations. In listening to this conversation today, however, it's my hope that perhaps, just perhaps, it may lead to a spring of inspiration that will spur us all on to find ways to take action and genuinely consider what we can do to help those in need. Rossella Bottone is a vulnerability analysis advisor for the United Nations World Food Program. Currently based in the Panama Regional office, she has spent more than 15 years of experience in the humanitarian sector. She is an expert in emergency food security assessments, vulnerability surveys, and data analysis in support of early warning and emergency preparedness. She has worked in Nepal, Guatemala, Haiti, Senegal, DRC, Italy, and has conducted needs assessments for the World Food Program in more than 20 countries in Latin America and Africa. Rossella holds a master's degree in international cooperation from the University of Pavia, Italy, and is currently pursuing a master's in humanitarian action from the University of London. Aside from her job, Rossella's spirited interests include her family, traveling, and cooking. Originally from Napoli, Italy, she thinks that the deep passion for feeding people runs in her blood, and that food, like love, brings people together. On that note, Rossella, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Christopher, for the introduction. It's a pleasure to be here with you.
Yeah, well, it's an honor to have you on. I've been looking forward to this talk for quite some time. So without further ado, why don't we just jump right into it?
Yes, let's do it.
All right, excellent. Well, the first segment is something called Coloring Wikipedia. And basically this segment is, I read off a definition from Wikipedia about your job. And what I like about this, aside from what it provides, it kind of gives an overview of the actual job, but it also highlights what's not in the definition. And that's oftentimes the most interesting thing about it. Now, unfortunately, Wikipedia was not very helpful in providing a description of your position as a vulnerability analysis advisor. Therefore, I did have to improvise a little, and I found a description, which I'm guessing is general enough that it still would be applicable. And this, by the way, comes from the UNDP, United Nations Development Program. So here goes, vulnerability analysis advisor. And I've got a summary of key functions, okay?
Excellent.
All right. First one, analyze humanitarian situation. Develop and implement proper strategies which will be suitable with local contexts. Develop and maintain coordination and cooperation mechanisms among stakeholders. Ensures facilitation of knowledge building and management. All right, very general, very vague. I'm hoping you can kind of, unpack all of that for us and just kind of bring listeners up to speed in terms of, what you do and maybe even comment on a day-to-day, a typical day for you.
Of course, no problem. Also, these definitions are quite broad, as you said, and quite generic. And I remember when I started my career, it was very hard to explain to my family what I was doing.
Right.
And I have to say, for most of my careers, what I do is that I interview people. I knock on doors. I mean, my job is basically to gather evidence, to collect information from people in particularly challenging situations. I am an expert in emergency and migratory context, so I have done assessment in conflict, after an hurricane, after an earthquake, during the Ebola crisis. I mean, you name it. So basically, what we do is that we go to these places. Sometimes they are very accessible, sometimes they are remote, and we knock on doors. So I like to explain my job like this, and this is the part of the job that I really enjoy the most, because you visit people where they live and where they are, and basically what we do is that we ask, what are their needs, what is the current situation, what are their challenges, what are their difficulties. And so it has given me the opportunity to meet the thousands of people in the most incredible situation. I've been in refugee context in the the desert of Sahara. I have been in a hut in Djibouti. I have been in Tehran, in refugee of Afghan camps. I've been Latin America all over, interviewing people. And this is, again, as I said, what really constitutes the bulk of my work. Of course, there is also the bureaucratic part, because after that, we have to go back to the office and analyze data, produce reports, and hope that the information we have gathered transform into decisions. So when I try to explain my job, I like to say that we gather information that helps people to make decisions, and we hope to make the right decision on where to deliver assistance. So I would also say that I am at heart a humanitarian, because my work is mostly in the humanitarian sector and in emergency response. So I have the privilege to go to the primary source, the people that are in need, and then bring these people to the table where decisions have to be taken.
Wow. It sounds incredibly rewarding in that sense, and also quite challenging also in the same vein. I'd be curious as well, what kind of took your career? What led you into that profession? Maybe you could briefly sort of summarize that as well.
Yeah, I think when I was very young, I was always somehow drawn to helping others. I think this is also based in my culture and my Catholic, background. And so I had these ambitions that I wanted, as a young person, to save the world. And when I was 18, I set up on a trip to Nicaragua on my own, because I wanted to go out and discover the world. And that first trip meant for me the encounter with poverty. Nicaragua, it was 1996, it was coming out of a long war. And what I saw coming out from, a quiet city in the south of Italy where, the situation was okay, it was a tremendous shock. For the first time, I could touch, and see and walk with people that were facing extreme difficulties. And it was a discovery that moved something inside of me. And I just thought, I want to do something. I want to be out there. I want to meet people. And that's where my path started, And from then, after that, I tried to, I didn't know anybody who did this job. I think it was not a very common profession in my entourage. And so basically, I started to volunteer and then to research what course of study I could do. And then one experience led to the other. But I think that was the spark, that set me on motion.
Yeah, no, I hear you completely. It's funny, these experiences, as visceral as they can be, can set you on this path of discovery and just lead you on to the next thing and the next thing and the next thing, and here you are. And the work that you're doing is quite amazing. And I'm really excited to dig into it further and let all the listeners hear about all the things that you're involved with and some of your past accomplishments. Really quickly too, I mean, you mentioned, I guess, in terms of your work, being out in the field, speaking to people, but then of course, getting back into the office and gathering all that data and putting it together for action plans and so on and so forth. I guess as far as a typical day, is it basically kind of flip-flopping between those two things? Is that?
Yes, I think I have I generally have two kinds of typical days. I don't have I have a very normal life most of the time. I wake up, I prepare lunch for my kids. I have 4 kids. Then I bring kids to after school. I bring kids to do their sports, and then we have family dinners. I mean, I have a generally very normal life. I go to the office. We have been working online for the past 2 years. But then there is another side, most of the time, at least once a month, I travel, I take a plane, and then when I reach and go to another country. At present, I'm in charge of Latin America. So I don't know, last month I traveled to Ecuador, and sometimes it's meeting with other people, meeting with government counterparts, or meeting with partners. And so it can be really meeting or trainings. And some other times, my favorite part is where, for example, I left, I went to Colombia, and then I take another plane, I go to the border, and I had to interview migrants that were coming in from Venezuela. So my day can change, but in a typical year, pre-pandemic, in 2019, I've traveled under 120 days. My husband counts because all the days I've traveled, he was alone with the kids, but so we count, but it's quite dynamic. I stay sometimes here, work from the office, and then some other time I mean, when it's necessary, if there is an emergency and there is an hurricane, and then I have to support colleagues, I have to travel.
It sounds like that aspect could be, somewhat demanding at times, but also just a thought popped in my head too. I mean, you mentioned your family and having children, the type of work that you're doing and the reason for your travel, in a sense, probably for children could be interpreted as inspirational. And, the types of things that you're doing for others has to have an effect on them as well within your own family, a positive impact. So, I mean, yeah, you might be away here and there, but the type of work that you're doing, I think, aside from helping the people in these vulnerable, communities or countries, is also having this probably other effect within your own family that can't be understood.
I hope so, and certainly expose the kids and also friends and the people you talk to with different realities. Because even in my family, when I explain, I've traveled to the border with, this last year I was a lot working in Central America with migrants going towards the US, and then when I tell these stories, I think it has a positive consequence on the people that maybe they've never heard of this situation. They never knew that there were people suffering from this problem, etc. So it opens up, I think, minds and things that, we are not just focused on our small reality, but there are other things going up in the world. And I think this is always something that I have noticed with my family, with my friends, and now with my kids.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like to me we need more people like you doing that, so that this awareness can reach levels where we can start to actually have, even more significant sort of impacts and find ways to help. So yeah, thank you for sharing that, Rossella.
Yeah, no problem.
I would like to skip on over into our next segment, and it's something called the Q&A discovery. And as it sounds, I'm just going to give you a few questions here. And the first one kind of continues on with our conversation we just had. In terms of one of your roles, overseeing food security assessments, obviously that can involve the preparation of, tools, data analysis, report preparation. But I'd be wondering if you could kind of break that down for us a little bit more. I mean, as you said, this sort of position is a bit unique. And I don't think a lot of people probably have, even myself included, have a really good understanding of what that is. But in terms of that food security assessment, what does that truly entail as far as planning, timelines, challenges, stresses, et cetera, et cetera?
No, of course. I think, the majority of people, maybe you've heard in the news or reading a report, that are people in the world suffering hunger. And the problem is that to define that someone suffers for hunger, we use, a lot of information. It's not so easily established. And therefore, we have to collect data to be accountable also for this information. So basically, we generally look at data. We generally look at families, what we call the household, and we gather data. We ask these people about where they earn their income from, and what do they eat, if they are restricting their consumption, if they are also not able to cover other needs, if they're facing difficulties, or if there is an event that has affected the situation. Let's say there has been an hurricane, for example, in Central America, at Iota recently, and the people, maybe they are smallholder farmers, so we know that they earn their income from the land. And when there is an hurricane, we ask them what they've lost. Maybe they've lost the harvest, or maybe they lost the roof. And so we calculate that because they have to go this extra mile and cover additional expenses, we understand that based on what they were earning before, they would not be able to cover their basic needs. And by basic needs, generally, my area of expertise is around food security, ability to cover, your food needs. But it also implies access to water. It also implies having a shelter, and also covering other basic needs like education and health, because you can have food, but if you are sick and you cannot afford medicine, your health situation will deteriorate. So overall, all this information is collected, and then we establish, look, this family is suffering from hunger and we have to do something. And then that's where all this data is aggregated at global level to push for a political agenda and to say, wake up people, the food is there in this world. but unfortunately there are a lot of people that are not able to access it. So it can be as entertaining sometimes as we have group discussion with people and we ask them what do they eat, and in some instances, for example, people are only able to eat two types of food, for example, Central America, rice and beans, and their diet is not diversified enough. They don't have proteins enough, they don't have vegetables enough, and therefore the kids get malnourished. And so we have, by looking at what they eat and how they eat, we try to establish a program that addresses that. So that is what we do. But I've done most of my career, looking at households, what happens in a family. How you spend your money, where you allocate your resources, where your income is coming from, and also the stressor. What can affect it? Is price increase affecting you? Is loss of income affecting you? How the COVID pandemic, for example, has affected people? And that's what we have to look to understand better, what are the conditions of the people that we need to.
I'd be curious as well to hear a little bit. I mean, obviously, the type of work that you're doing, and certainly you're a professional and you go about all these things, and you've been doing it for many years now that exactly what you're after, as you just outlined. I'd be curious, as I said, to hear the ramifications or the impact that it has on you personally, sometimes seeing these situations that, probably are at times quite dire or challenging, the stress, I guess, associated with that. Like, how do you sort of manage those aspects of it? I mean, certainly there's a professionalism in there, and I completely understand that point, but also, just being a human as well.
No, but of course, as you say, I think empathy is at the core of our job, because if you don't put ourselves in the situation, the people we interview, it's very difficult to understand. And, I want to tell a story just to make you understand, because a few years ago, I've been sent to Central Africa to interview people. And they were facing a new phase of conflict, and there were a lot of people that had been attacked and they were robbed of their harvest, etc. And so we prepared our questionnaires, and we had prepared our set of possibilities, asking people, what have affected you in the past, 6 months. And on our list, there were a lot of situations like robbery, assault, violence, etc., related to the context. But when I visited all these families, none of them mentioned this issue. The majority of the answer I had was, my husband left. I remember one person said, my kids swallowed the coin and there is not an health center nearby. Another person been attacked by a snake. A lot of extramarital issues. So just to give you that sometimes, we cope because these are just human beings like me and you. And sometimes we imagine that, poor people, they're in the middle of the world. Of course, there's more tragedy to it. But sometimes we have to be able to really establish a good communication with these people, understand what is their drama. Maybe their drama is not the word. The drama is that, like in this case, their husband left, there is not an center. And so you have to discuss and then to understand what is the real problem that you can address. And also, I think this connection is also helped me overcome very difficult situations, because when you are in front of people that have been abused, attacked, mutilated, that have lost their house, that have lost loved ones, it's very hard. And so I've also seen myself shutting down, closing emotion, and you try to become a machine because it's too much, to take on. But on the other side, it's a moment where you can also connect with people and offer, your experience. And people always welcome that. In many instances now, I share the fact that I have kids, and this is a very good entry point. People are interested also in my life. They don't care if you come from a very different. So maybe I can be sitting in the hill of Guatemala with the Mayans, more of the farmer. We have nothing in common, but we sit down and I tell them, look, I have my kids, and I show from the photo the pictures, and we start to discuss. And that's how I overcome the fact that I am an entitled, rich, educated, all of the things. And I could spend my days crying and that's what I was doing at 18. When I was 18, I was crying all day because I was saying, oh, these people are poor and I have everything. And now, in order to overcome that, the only thing you can do is to offer empathy and also to be there and share. And when I learned that, I think I made a step forward in my work. So I've enjoyed so much sitting under the tree, in Djibouti listening to story of nomads, and I had nothing, zero in common with these women. But we had an incredible encounter because I could tell them of my experiences going to the university and studying and working and being economically independent. And they would tell me how is it being at home, and having to feed the camel. And, you learn about different lives, and you're in the end, when you arrive at the end, you understand that we are all the same. We have the same, we share humanity, and that's what brings us together, no matter what.
Yeah, like you said, just being human, humanity.
Yeah.
There's so many cultural differences along the way, but ultimately, like these aspects of family, love, loss, and these emotions, food, right?
Is the perfect connection. It's like, we start to discuss and how you eat, and this has always been also another great entry point. And also, I think if you are humble and you are open, and also something else that I've learned is that because I am in a privileged position, I have maybe to do something, and so I take advantage of the fact that I have a privileged position, also for the people that are not there, and speak up for them when I can, and enjoy my life when I can, because it's also out of respect for the fact that so many people do not have the same opportunities just by chance, by the chance of where they've been born.
Yeah, a lot of serendipity there. That's really interesting. I really enjoyed listening to that kind of the way you described, almost like a dichotomy between like the professionalism side of it, as I think you said, like being almost like a machine. You don't want to be that. You obviously want to keep that aspect of empathy and heart in it, but also you don't want to go too far in. As you said, when you're 18, 19, you're overflowing with that, and that might have impeded your ability to do your job in the best possible way. Exactly. And now where you're at after these many years of experience, you found that balance in between the two, and still able to connect with people and ultimately, serve your role in the best possible way. So thank you for sharing that, Rossella. That was really, I think, a fascinating take, and it really cleared things up, I think, for a lot of listeners, and I know for myself in particular. So thank you. The next question I have for you kind of segues into, some other issues related to what we were just speaking about. And I'd love to hear, what is it like to have, of course, this deep-seated awareness of what happens behind the scenes? So when there are global emergencies related to your area of expertise, for example, there's a sudden or even maybe a slow-burning food-related accessibility issue for a population. How do you mentally control yourself and your thoughts, knowing what's going on behind the scenes, either with colleagues, that are in that part of the world, or, how do you compartmentalize, I guess, all of those things and emotions?
Well, there are two things. First of all, you always feel somehow in urge you would like to do something. So, because I know how stressful emergencies can be, and I know how messy it can be and complicated, and it's not easy, and therefore there is always this feeling I would like to do something. I recall when a couple of years ago there was an hurricane in Bahamas, and I was in Rome by chance. I was traveling there, and colleagues reached out, and you see all these images and it's like, I can't be there, and on the one side, but on the other side, first of all, you cannot be everywhere.
Right.
But I think, the technical knowledge, whenever possible, we try to provide support. And now, thanks to technology, we can also do a lot of things remotely. So we can provide the hand. But the other feeling that I generally have, I want to speak with people, because people have a partial vision, I think, of what is happening. And I've experienced that a lot with the Syrian crisis, because I was living in Italy at the time, even now, there are all these migrants arriving at the coast of Italy, and people have a very limited understanding of what is behind that, and so what moves me is that I want to speak with people and let them know, because I have been in these countries, I have seen what these people are experiencing, I understand why they would be living and risking their lives, to arrive to the shore of Italy. And this is sometimes so simplified, and so they are invading Italy, or these are people that had maybe nothing to do, and one morning they woke up and they want to come. So when there are these massive influx, for example, of migrants, because I worked a lot in migratory crisis, my main desire is that I would like to raise awareness, to talk to more people and to tell them, put yourself in the seat of these other persons and see where they come from and understand. I mean, last year I had the chance to do many public talk about Central American migration, and I think this is the single thing that deprimated the most. Nobody wake up one day and leave everything and leave their country, their comfort zone, their family, their roots, just because they want to go to the United States. Nobody. I mean, there is a lot of suffering behind that.
Yeah.
Sometimes there are dreams, there are expectations, but in many of the cases there is a lot of suffering. So I think that's my number one feeling. I want to raise awareness. I think we need to talk more about these things and to create more empathy and understanding of these global issues.
Yeah, no, I wholeheartedly agree with that. And it seems as though, certainly, you see this in the news and the media right now quite a bit. I mean, it's a constant sort of thing. And at times it seems that the coverage would be, decent, but other times it just hones in on some of these other points that aren't always serving that purpose of raising the awareness and highlighting the points that you just raised of like the reasons for this. Why are they doing this? I feel as though oftentimes we're just honing in on the actual event, like a ship capsizing and the facts of what had transpired after that. But what led, like you said, what led to these people deciding to just leave? What were the reasons?
Exactly.
Obviously several reasons led to that sort of decision. So no, that's certainly an admirable cause, and I think certainly we need more people like you, Rossella. I think is what it boils down to.
No, I think I feel
like
very privileged. I also feel very privileged because you are exposed to situations that very few people are able to see, and I have had the chance really to see incredible scenario. A few years ago in 2016, I interviewed people that were on the road from the Horn of Africa towards Italy. We wanted to describe better, and also that trip for me, it was very difficult but also enlightening, and I felt it a privilege to being able to understand better what is moving people, what is happening, as you said, behind the scene, and that reality sometimes much more nuanced than how we can see on the newspaper.
Yeah. Well, I hope from this talk, even alone, as I kind of alluded to in the intro, that, it can sort of spark something for someone, just to take it a little bit further, to kind of dig in and try to understand and use that empathy from within to try to connect with people and the reasons for some of these things. All right. Well, I would like to transition to a different question here. It's been quite heavy, obviously, but let's go to the other side of things. What is it like to experience, successfully executed projects? And I know in our correspondence, you shared a photo from 2020 from World Food Program, how you were awarded, the WFP was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. I mean, what was it like to be part of something like that?
I mean, it's a feeling of satisfaction. Without going to the great achievement, we were also proud to have been awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. But in many instances, I've had this feeling. I remember one of my first assignments with WFP. I was working in Guatemala, and there has been a terrible Hurricane Stan, back in 2005, and it was very complicated because parts of the country had been, really wiped out by the hurricane, and we had to reach people. And at the time, we had to distribute food. And I remember when one day, finally, we had reached some very remote communities, and we had distributed food. I mean, we were bringing maize, beans, oil to people so that they could cook. And I remember I was sitting on some, we have these huge 50 kilos bags on rice, for example. I was sitting on these bags with my colleagues, and some people from the communities brought us some traditional food in Guatemala. It's called the tamales, which is a maize meal. And I opened it's cooked inside the banana leaf. So we opened these banana leaves and we eat this food. And I was looking inside, and I felt like, this is the place of the world where this is my place. It's like this incredible feeling that you have achieved something in the right place. You are in the right place in the right time. And giving that bag of rice somehow, changed something. And I had this feeling. I've been so lucky, and that's why I also love my job, because I've had this feeling. And sometimes it's been that. Sometimes I've had the chance to present data in very high level UN meeting in New York. And it was totally different scenario. But I remember a couple of years ago, I was there, advocating for the Venezuelan migrants. And while I was in the UN building in New York, and I was sitting there and I was understanding that something was moving, some decisions were being taken, to provide assistance. You go away and you feel like, okay, good job. I don't know. It's an amazing experience because it's like you feel that you are part of something much bigger than yourself, so much incredibly bigger. There are things that I don't even understand in terms of sometimes political, networks. But it's like you feel you have moved your little piece on the chessboard, and that's an amazing feeling. And of course, we have a very also sometimes rewarding job because in emergency it's fast and you deliver and you take the plane and so. But on the other side, there is also this what we call this advocacy work and political work, and then we write reports and we push. And when finally decision arrives, like last year, after 2 years of political negotiation, we managed to open an office in Venezuela. Wow. And when that office opened, I woke up that day and I was like, I did something. I was able to contribute to that.
Yeah.
It's an amazing feeling. I don't know. I cannot explain, but just saying, I was able to move my small piece, and I was in the right place in the right time. It's an amazing feeling.
I think just the way you've described it comes across clear. And I think the emotion in your voice also kind of tells a lot of it. And as I was listening, I just had this imagery in my head of just a heart. I think that's what all of this is, centered around. And, some of the aspects of what you just outlined as far as like the political side and getting the funding and so on and so forth. That could be just as challenging or even more challenging than the actual work that you're potentially doing in the field, trying to get these things moving in the right direction. And when they finally do, it must be an absolutely amazing feeling because what it represents. What it represents to people, what it represents to lives, what it represents to humanity. So no, I cannot completely understand or claim to understand exactly, but at least in terms of the words and the way you describe it, I could imagine, it just being this feeling of elation. So thank you for sharing that. We are going to move into another question here. And this last one in the Q&A segment is one that I did intentionally kind of hold back for the weight that it carries. And basically, for our listeners, I just want to let you know that Rossella and I, of course, we had some correspondence before in prepping for this talk. And she shared something with me, which she herself alluded to, is holding incredible significance. And in her words, she's been shaped personally as far as her character, professional life, and ways in which she navigates the world by this one particular event. So, Rossella, perhaps you could explain.
Yes, of course. And I'm sorry, I'm very emotional when I talk about this, but I have 4 kids, and what I've shared with you is that my first daughter was born with a very rare brain malformation. It's called agenesis of the corpus callosum. So basically, she has what is called a split brain. She doesn't have the middle section of the brain. And first, when we received the news, I was pregnant, and of course, we were terrified. And you can imagine it was the first pregnancy and the first child, and we had a lot of expectations. And also because when we heard the news, they told us that Teresa, our first daughter, would be living in a vegetative state. So we were immediately confronted. Some doctors told us to stop the pregnancy and to lose hope, etc. But for our education and beliefs, we of course wanted to keep the baby. And then I just want to write to the end of the story, because now I have a healthy and thriving 12 years old. She has a lot of challenges as a neurodiverse person and disabled in some of their abilities, but she's trying every day, and she's learning every day, and she's improving every day. And I think this event has of course shaped myself as a person and as a professional, and also as a human being, because the first lesson is that things do not go as you plan, and there are things that you can't plan. And the other is that there is a lot, we have there is hope, but there is a lot of work and effort and in fighting for a more equal world where people that are diverse have also space and a voice, because sometimes our world is just made for perfect people. And it has been a learning that a lot of spaces, a lot of situations are not adequate when there is a diversity. We should all be fitting the same scheme. And where something diverges from the scheme, it can be in school, it can be in social spaces, it can be, in gatherings. You have to give, in this case, my daughter, I had to provide the voice and say, you have to accommodate these other needs. And to make these other needs visible, as we were saying before, these are another nuance of reality. There is not the reality of normal people. There is also this other reality. And also my professional career, because of course, there is a required special assistance in school, etc. So I've always had to somehow bargain to make sure that I could be valued as a professional, even if requiring sometimes time off work or sometimes inadequate duty station, because I have to make sure that my daughter would be taken care of. So yeah, it's been a challenge, but a working challenge.
Yeah, well, but I think also it speaks perhaps to your character and this blend between the professionalism and then personal, within your own life. And I can certainly see how it is all fully interconnected in who you are as a human being. And probably, the learning experiences on both sides are transferable. And no, thank you so much for sharing that. Yeah. All right. Well, I am going to skip over to a new segment here, and it's something called a water cooler story. And basically, what we're going to do here is, I'm going to ask you to share a story, and it can be based on anything, any particular emotion, perhaps that triggers a story behind it. So I'd be curious to hear what you have for us today, Rossella.
Thank you, Grace. So I wanted to share a story that has happened to me a couple of years ago at the border of Venezuela, because somehow this has marked first of all, my professional life in some ways, but also reinforced, my belief as a professional. I've always worked in context. Many times contexts that are very far from my reality. I don't know, in Congo, in DRC, or even, in rural areas of Central America. You meet people, as I was saying before, that are very different from myself, like a small older farmer, so it's you understand people, it's nice talking to them, you engage, but they are different from you. But a couple of years ago, I think it was at the end of 2018, beginning of 2019, there was a sudden increase in the influx of Venezuelan migrants into Colombia. And so I was requested to go to the border to look at the situation, to conduct what we say an assessment. And when I arrived there, and I started to interview people, and these interviews were transforming for me, because the people I was interviewing were like me. They were nurses, teachers, professionals, people with PhDs, lots of educated people that had to leave because of the economic crisis and political crisis that Venezuela was facing. And they were traveling with a backpack, with kids sometimes, with 2 kids, 3 kids. And it was like seeing yourself in a mirror. And for the first time in my life, it was like, this could happen to me, Maybe one day, something happens in the country where I'm based, and I don't have a house, you don't have, you don't have any more your resources, you have a backpack. That's the only thing that you can bring with you. And you have to grab your kids by the hand and walk into a foreign country and see what you find. And that experience was amazing. And I saw so many people that were also very thin because they hadn't eaten in days, and they were walking from the border to Bogota, which is over 1,000 kilometers. We call them the caminantes, the people on the move. And one day I wanted to be there is a bridge the bridge Simon Bolivar between Colombia and Venezuela, and it's a very famous bridge. And I wanted to go there. I wanted to walk up to Venezuela. And my colleagues, I was with the security colleague, I was telling me, you cannot go there, like. But I said, I want to also, walk with these people. So I crossed the bridge, and as I was going towards Venezuela, I would see this flow of people coming. It was like being I cannot say, it was a stream of people coming with one luggage, with one backpack, carrying kids, and carrying whatever they could. And of course, walking. You couldn't cross the bridge with the cars, okay, because officially the border was closed. And when I was there and experiencing this stream passing through, I was like, first of all, it's like you are at the center of history. Something is happening here. It's like this is where the world is moving. And then second of all, this tremendous feeling is that what if this happens to me tomorrow? What if I have to grab my kids and go? How would I feel? And this experience has been transformative. Because once again, I could experience that if we go out there and we try to do something for the others, but it's also in light of the fact that we have to recognize ourselves in these other people. We don't have to treat people like, the poor people of Africa, they're dying of hunger. No, this could be ourselves.
Yeah, and I think,
sorry to interrupt. No, but that was really, for me I remember that night I sat on my computer and I wrote a letter to my colleagues, because I told them, once again, if I can do something for these people, if I can even, I remove a stone out of their road so that they can walk better, I would do that, because that is what is the meaning of our job. And I experienced that, even physically.
Yeah. Now, I was just going to say, these are the types of stories that we need coverage on. These are the types of things I think the media often overlooks, and the feeling behind it. Obviously, facts are certainly important. We cannot ignore those, and we can't displace those things. But these stories in behind or attached to the facts are what I think people need to hear more of. Because like you said, I think it's quite rare for us, and you've used this word many times, and being privileged and so on and so forth, like just almost based on luck and serendipity, where we're born, the culture we're born into allows for a lot of, good things to happen in our lives. Yeah. And it could very easily be, quite different. And that understanding or that degree of empathy is something that I find, and it sounds like you find as well, is missing sometimes within, a lot of Western nations, at least. And I think those stories are quite powerful and quite moving. And if you can key in on them and actually genuinely sink yourself into that moment as best you can, that's where a lot of the emotion and learning can come from. Very powerful indeed.
Yeah, of course. And also, there is this understanding also that, we are so, whatever we live is so fragile. And I think that precarity of life is also what makes it, beautiful, but, also making us want to live, I don't know, fully, because, you never know. Venezuela was the country that was functioning perfectly. People were having a normal life, right. And people do not know. And I think I have learned this lesson many times in my career. I had the same experience in Syria, and but this one was really, incredible. And
Yeah, the imagery of the way you described it as well. I, as you were going on, I was trying to, picture it in my mind as well as best as I could. And I could not imagine it not being a special moment in many respects. So again, thank you for sharing that.
You're welcome.
We are heading around the bend. We're going into our last segment here, Rossella, and it's something called the crystal ball segment. And as the name implies, we're looking towards the future. Now, oftentimes we'll look at trends within an industry or where the guest thinks his or her profession is going. But I would kind of like to lead off with this. With just about every climate-based assessment kind of indicating future challenges and stresses on the planet, an obvious truth is that vulnerable populations around the world will continue to be, under immense pressures. So with that in mind, coupled with your years of experience and knowledge, I'd be curious to hear, how do you see your field evolving?
I think we will be engaged, as you said, more and more in areas affected by climate-related shock. That's for sure. We are already seeing this more and more drought, more and more hurricanes, and this is unfortunately, is inevitable at present, and we hope that the situation can improve. And the other issue that I see rising and probably will I hope that there will be some political change, but that the migratory movements across the globe are increasing. And we should just acknowledge that people move. Like they've moved for, thousands of years since the beginning of humanity. But somehow there's been a moment in history where we expected people to stay where they are and stay in your country. Maybe after Second World War, it's like, stay where you are. But now there is a new surge of migratory movements. People are moving, and they are moving massively. And they are moving because they look for better conditions. And I think we should be open to that, because people, they have no interest in staying where they are not well. So, we should be open to that, but we will definitely work more in migration more, and in addressing the needs of people that are on the move, and in climate related shocks. And therefore, I think that in my profession, we are more and more already now working in how we can improve the capacity of people to respond to shock, how we can anticipate shock with all the technologies and the tools. But so we have to work on these two sides. We have to use a lot the top-notch technology to predict, to anticipate, to foresee. And on the other side, we have to do the traditional work of deliver support when an emergency. So there will be these two. But I think these two areas will really spike in the future, as I see it coming already.
Yeah, I can certainly see that. We're definitely getting that divide, and I think it's becoming like an awareness issue that is kind of rising, where we do have these wealthier nations that are getting richer and richer, and these poor countries that are unfortunately going the other direction, and this disparity between the two is probably leading to a lot of what
and
you
also have to consider the demographic pressure that there is in certain sides of the world, and the western northern world is getting older, and so eventually there will be a need for people to come and do the job. But because the demographic pressure, I am a data person, I use data. And if you look at certain country demographic, it's inevitable that people will move. And if you look at other country demographic, it's inevitable they will need people, because there are certain populations that are aging and some others that are exploding. And so it's something that it has to happen. It will come. Because there is this pressure, and we cannot stop it. It's an evolution, of the people. So
yeah. I don't mean to put you on the spot here, but in terms of that, looking at the data, understanding this, and looking at the trends, what's happening now, and projecting that to continue, are you optimistic that things are going to head?
I'm always optimistic. I am, otherwise I couldn't do my job.
Excellent. Yeah.
I am optimistic. I think that I see positive movements. I really see in the younger generation more. The younger generation today is much more aware of global issues than we were 20 years ago. And so that's why I'm optimistic, because they are more aware of global challenges like climate change, migratory movement. So I believe that things will improve. And I also believe that at a certain point, decisions have to be taken also politically to acknowledge that the world has changed. We still use, for example, for welcoming migrants definition that have been created in the 50s. So I'm hopeful that we will adapt and we will change, and there are positive experiences that show us that things can improve, and that the future can be brighter.
Yeah. Well, thank you again for sharing that, Rossella. I think we are drawing to a close here, but I have to say, Rossella, it has been such an informative and also, I'd say, exciting talk. And also, one more thing I'd like to add, I've already mentioned this once before, but I just have this imagery in my head of just a giant heart. I think,
Thank
which
you.
represents this talk. And yeah, I think it fits. It fits a lot of what you've shared in terms of the stories, in terms of the information. And I really, truly believe that listeners will, one, come away, better informed about people like yourself, all of the good work that you are doing, and two, the reasons for it and why we need to continue on this path and spread more awareness for a lot of these points. So again, I sincerely thank you for joining us today.
No, and thank you for the opportunity.
Well, for those interested in learning more about Rossella and her work, you can find her on LinkedIn and Instagram. And also, if you like today's show, be sure to tell a friend and share. The more that we can understand each other and the world around us, I think the better off we're all going to be. And also, too, of course, to show support, you can rate, review, and subscribe to Life as a wherever you access your podcasts. And finally, don't forget to join us on the next episode of Life as a, where we'll continue to explore and unearth the details and professions of people around us. I'm Christopher Schoenwald, your host, and until next time, stay curious about life and living.